Hi, this is Christy Bertram with Scissortail Studio, and in this video today we are going to be talking about embroidering a child's t-shirt. I'm going to walk you through step by step the steps on how to stabilize, hoop, and embroider a child's t-shirt, and hopefully you'll pick up a few tips along the way that will make this project and process a little bit easier for you the next time you go to do a t-shirt. This is the sample t-shirt that we'll be creating. This little deer design is just a simple one that I digitized in my embroidery software, and it is an applique design. So as we stitch this design in this quick little tutorial, we will also show you how to do the steps for creating the applique. So that's actually where I'm going to start. When you're doing applique by embroidery machine, some people use a fusible web underneath the applique and some don't. I personally really like to use a fusible web. So my first step is to cut a square of the applique fabric I'll be using and then fuse a piece of fusible web to the back of that applique fabric. Next, I print the template for the applique design I'll be creating, and I do have a video on my website on how to create these templates if it's not something you've done before. So you print the template and then we are going to cut this out, and you can see we're cutting from the right side here. If you cut from the reverse side, if you're just make sure you're cutting the correct direction. So this one I'm cutting from the front side, and my fusible web is on the back side of this fabric. So you can see here we've cut it away, and I just adhere my template, my applique template, to my fabric with a light spray of a temporary adhesive spray. Next I peel that away, and you can see now I've just got my little deer applique ready to go, and my fusible web is still on the back. So I go ahead and peel off the backing paper, and that reveals that fusible web behind it, and then I'm going to set that aside until I'm ready to actually stitch my design. This is the t-shirt we're going to be working on, and I've actually already done the first step, and that's to turn it inside out. So when I'm working with a kid's t-shirt, the first thing I want to do is to turn it inside out. And we are going to use a mesh cutaway stabilizer. Polymesh is one of the brand names for this, so it's a no-show mesh stabilizer. It's 100% nylon, and it's really soft, so it works great for children's t-shirts. And the first thing I'm going to do is I've actually cut a piece of this stabilizer, and it happens to be large enough that it covers almost the entire back of this child's t-shirt. This is like a size 18 months t-shirt here. And so I've lightly sprayed that with temporary adhesive spray and then placed it over the entire back. Depending on the size of your t-shirt, it may not actually be the full size of the whole shirt here. It might be smaller. You would just want to add this stabilizer to the back of wherever that embroidery design is going to go. So just center that piece on the back of where the embroidery is going to go, and you're going to go ahead and adhere that to the t-shirt, either using temporary adhesive spray, or you can also find this mesh stabilizer in an iron-on form, so you can also iron that on. But the purpose of this here is we want to actually adhere the stabilizer to the t-shirt before we do anything else, because that's going to keep it from stretching as we're working with it. So that's why we want to actually stick it on as opposed to just hooping it up together loose under there. By sticking it on, it keeps the t-shirt from stretching as we're working on it. And even though with this t-shirt it's small enough we're actually going to end up doing it without hooping the t-shirt itself, we still don't want that to stretch as we're placing it onto the stabilizer. So stabilizing the fabric first is a really important step to getting that perfectly smooth embroidery like you saw on the sample t-shirts that we started with here. So the next step is going to be determine where I want to place my design on my t-shirt. And I've printed a template from my embroidery software, and I've printed it at 100% size, and I printed the X and Y axis here. And what I'm doing is I'm just cutting at a little slit at that center where you see that X and Y axis. I just cut a little slit with my rotary cutter, and then I fold back 2 corners, and that's going to make it really easy for me to mark the center when I've decided my placement on my shirt. So here I've just turned my shirt back inside out, and I'm laying this template on it to determine exactly where I want that to go. When you're doing your placement, if you're lucky enough that you actually have the kid who's going to be wearing this shirt handy, put it on them and then put the template on top, and that'll give you the very best idea of where you want it to go. But in general, typically on a kid's shirt, a lot of times the designs are in the center chest area, as opposed to with adult shirts, a lot of times we put a design on the left chest. But with kids' shirts and simple, fun designs like this, they typically go in the center. So we can easily mark the center of our shirt, mark that up and down line. So we'd measure across the middle of the shirt and mark the center, or fold the shirt in half to mark the center. And then as far as where the other direction center should go, we're going to do that based on where we want it to look. One thing to be careful of is it's very easy to be tempted to put the design too low on the shirt, and typically you don't want it too close to the neckline. You want to leave at least an inch from the bottom of the neckline to the top of your design, but beyond that, higher is better. If you get it too low, it's going to start looking like the design's on the belly or the abdomen of the shirt, as opposed to on the center chest, which is where we want it to go. So just be sure to aim a little higher. With kids' shirts, there's not a real easy, simple rule of exactly where that center needs to go, because it depends on the size of the design and the size of the shirt. So use that template to eyeball where the location should be, and then mark the center location. Another thing you want to keep in mind is if you want to try to be able to hoop your shirt, here I've laid out my hoop on my shirt. You can see that the position I had chosen for my design, it won't fit in the hoop this way. And I actually could hoop this shirt. This shirt is big enough I could hoop it, except for the design wouldn't fit because of its location. So I can either move the design down a little bit and get it to fit in my hoop, or I can do the hoopless method of embroidery, which is what we're actually going to do. So instead of hooping the shirt itself, we're going to hoop a piece of stabilizer. And here I've just hooped a piece of stabilizer, and I've laid my template in the middle just to show that it fits fine in the middle of the hoop. So our next step here, we turn the shirt back right side out, and we're going to mark it if you haven't already turned it inside out. So we mark the center. And when you mark the center of the shirt, sometimes people will mark just a small little mark in the center, and that's okay, but I also like to really extend those lines. This is just with a simple chalk marker, and I like to really extend those lines. That makes it easier for me to line everything up and helps me to do a better job of keeping the shirt straight as I'm getting it hooped. So go ahead and use your quilt ruler or whatever ruler you have on hand to make those lines nice and long to make it easier to work with. And our next step is to take a second piece of stabilizer. Remember, we've already got one piece of stabilizer adhered to the back of our t-shirt. We're hooping now a second piece of stabilizer all by itself, and then we're marking the center of our hoop. And we mark the center using the template guidelines that came with our hoop, or if your hoop has these little markings here to show you where the center is, you want to mark the center. And again, just like on the t-shirt where we extended the lines out, I find it easiest personally if I go ahead and extend the lines of my markings on my stabilizer out as far as I can. This makes it easier for me as I go to line it up. Because I have some leeway. When I get this design onto my embroidery machine, I can always scooch the design a little to the left or a little to the right or up or down to get it positioned just right. But it's very important that I hoop my fabric, or I apply my fabric to my hoop straight, so that those lines are at least parallel to one another, so my design doesn't end up at an angle. So extending those lines will help you keep everything straighter. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to spray this hoop. So we're going to spray this hoop with temporary adhesive spray. We're spraying the stabilizer. If you have a hoop guard or something to protect your hoop, that's a good idea while you're spraying it, so that you can keep it from getting any adhesive spray on the hoop itself. I use a manila file folder, and I have a post on my website on Scissortail Studio on how to use a manila file folder to protect that hoop. So now we want to do is to put the shirt onto that sprayed or now sticky stabilizer that we've made sticky with our adhesive spray. And the goal is to line the lines that we've marked on our t-shirt onto the exact same lines we've marked onto our hoop. And we want to keep it as straight as possible. I find it helpful sometimes to put a straight pin right into the middle of this, and that way I can check from the back side to see if I'm getting it right down into the stabilizer and keeping everything straight. Remember that your main goal is to keep these lines parallel to each other. So it's more important that they are parallel and straight than that they are exactly on top of each other, because you can always adjust the position at your machine a little bit one direction or another. Now, another trick to notice here is that when we've put this onto our stabilizer, we've lifted up from the bottom of the t-shirt. So this curly hem here, you're seeing that's the hem of the t-shirt, not the neckline. So we're working through the hole that is the opening of the bottom of the t-shirt as opposed to trying to pull the neckline down. This is one thing that I've seen people do. I've done it myself, but what happens is that neckline is not near big enough to keep it open and apart while you're doing the embroidery, and more than likely you'll end up actually stitching the back of the shirt to the front of the shirt if you do it that way. So pull the bottom of the t-shirt open, and that way you have more area to work with. If you're working with a onesie or a snap bottom shirt, you can use this exact same method, and the only difference is that you just unsnap the shirt as you come to work it and lift it up here. So your snaps would be here and here as you open up that shirt. So we've got that, and we're going to smooth that shirt onto that stabilizer, trying to get as much surface area flat onto the stabilizer as possible. And once you've done that, what I like to do is use these jumbo wonder clips. They are really handy for helping to hold the fabric out of the way. I've stretched that t-shirt just a little bit in the open area, and make sure very carefully not to stretch the area that will be embroidered. And remember, we've got that piece of stabilizer on the back of that fabric there to help keep us from stretching it. But we can stretch the part that we're not embroidering. So I've stretched that out of the way and clipped it, clipped the layers together, and then I also clip it to the stabilizer, that bottom layer of stabilizer that's actually hooped. So that kind of helps keep everything out of the way. When you're doing these clips, just be cautious of where your hoop attaches to your machine. You just want to make sure that these clips are not going to be in the way of where your machine arm is going to be moving or where your hoop attaches to your machine. Now we're going to go ahead and place the hoop onto the machine, and using the positioning tools in our embroidery machine, we're just going to make sure that the center of our design is exactly centered as we go to stitch it out. And I like to actually drop the needle with the hand wheel just to make sure it's exactly in the center of that marked design area that I've marked. And then we start stitching the design. Now, because this is an applique design, the first line that stitch is going to be the guide stitch or the placement stitch for the applique. So we've got that stitched here, and then we actually remove this from the machine. You don't have to remove it from the machine necessarily to put your applique fabric on, but I prefer to because I feel like I get a better alignment if I do it off the machine than trying to put it under the needle. So you can go ahead and take the hoop off of the machine, and then we are going to take that piece of applique fabric that we prepared ahead of time, spray the back of that with a temporary adhesive spray, and then just line that up exactly with those placement lines. If you want to, and you have a small iron, because we put fusible web on the back of this, you can go ahead and iron this within that hoop area and really have a permanent fuse before you even finish the rest of the design. If you don't have a small iron available to you, that's okay. You can go ahead and just stitch the design, and then you can do the fusing when the design is completely finished. So now we'll return the hoop to the machine and to continue sewing the design. So you can see it's beginning to sew the tack down, which will tack down that applique. Notice here I'm using a chopstick that's going to help hold that excess fabric out of the way while we do the embroidery. It's very tempting to use our fingers to hold any excess fabric out of the way, but Believe me from experience, you don't want your fingers too close to that needle. Even if the needle itself doesn't go through your finger, the needle bar can catch your finger, and it's not very pleasant. So use a chopstick or a stylus of some sort to hold any excess fabric out of the way while your embroidery is going. So you can see here now it has finished stitching the tack down to the applique, and we'll just continue stitching the rest of the design, following the instructions that came with it if it is a design that you've purchased, or following your own chart if it's one that you've created yourself, like I have here. So now the design is complete. We're ready to do the finishing. And the finishing really is just as important as the embroidery to get a really professional looking completed design. The next thing we'll do, of course, is trim all the jump stitches, and then we'll remove this hoop from the we'll remove the stabilizer from the hoop, and we're going to remove the stabilizer from the back of the design. When you remove the stabilizer from the back of the design, you want to gather it all up, and we're actually pulling up both layers here. So we're pulling up the layer that was hooped and also the layer that we had adhered to the back of our fabric. We're going to gather all that up, and I like to gather it up kind of in a ball in my hand and then pull the fabric away so that you've got the stabilizer completely separated from the fabric. And then once I do that, I'm going to start cutting away this stabilizer. And you can see the tip of my scissors here, making sure that I keep the fabric towards me as I cut. And if you think about it, the purpose in that is to keep you from cutting a nick in your fabric. If you turn it around the other way and you just cut away the stabilizer and you can't see the fabric while you're cutting, it's very easy to cut one of those little V-snips right into your fabric. So make sure that when you're cutting away the stabilizer, the fabric is always facing you so you can see what you're cutting. Now once I'm done, I like to cut my stabilizer. I always like to try to have rounded corners. If I'm not going to use a piece of interfacing or something to cover the embroidery, those rounded corners show less from the front side, and they also are less irritating to the skin because they're rounded, so there's not a little corner to catch on anything. So as you cut around the stabilizer, around the corners, and then for a child's t-shirt, I highly recommend that you use a piece of fusible interfacing. They actually make a specialty product called Gentle Touch that is a stretchy, fusible interfacing that you can add to the back of your embroidery after you've completed it, and then the fabric is a little bit stretchy. I just use a lightweight fusible interfacing. Any soft, lightweight fusible interfacing will work fine. Just remember that wherever you fuse that to the back of your t-shirt, that area of the t-shirt is not going to stretch. And then you also want to make sure it's a lightweight fusible so that it's not a heavy interfacing that's going to show through. So this is just a really lightweight fusible interfacing. And again, I've kind of rounded the corners. I want that piece big enough that I'm actually fusing it over the embroidery stitches and also over the edges of the stabilizer. And this way there's nothing to rub against the child's skin or irritate the skin. And that'll just seal everything up on the back side. Now when I fuse this, I will usually also it'll be fusing the fabric that's on the other side as well. But sometimes I'll flip it over and fuse it from the other side as well. If you do flip it over and fuse it from the other side to get that applique fabric very well fused down, just be sure you use a pressing cloth over it because you don't want to crush your pretty embroidery threads. To finish out this design, I just added a simple little ribbon bow, and then I just machine tacked that on with a bar tack stitch. And you can see we finished it out. I did 2 of these shirts for 2 of my nieces for Christmas, and then made some matching bows to coordinate with them and really add that finished touch to the project. And I did have a little model. She got to see her Christmas present a little early, but hopefully she'll forget by the time Christmas comes around. And here's how she looks in her shirt and her bow. I think she's pretty pleased with it. So thanks for joining us for this tutorial. If you have any questions about this process or you need additional tips on embroidering on a child's t-shirt, just leave us a note in the comments below or visit our website at scissortailstudio.com. That's scissortailstudio.com, and you can leave us a comment there and we'll be happy to address any questions you might have about embroidering a child's t-shirt. Thanks!